What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're taking a look at Indiana Jones and the Great Circle here on the ROG Ally X. This is a game I've really been excited to get into, not just to play, but to test and see how it's going to do. We saw that spec sheet that came out, and I haven't had very high hopes for any of the handhelds, and I don't think anybody really does, but surprisingly playable in my opinion on the Ally X and the Legion Go with the Z1 Extreme. We'll start with the Ally X here in this video and take a look at some of the performance that we're getting. And while we are going to rely on low and 720p mostly in the video, as this is a difficult game to run, we are starting off here with a little bit of medium, and we'll take a look at some of the other resolution settings here real quick before we get more into it. But going through the game settings here, we'll have borderless windowed 16:9, again 720p to start with, but we'll look at 900p and 1080p really quickly here. But again, 720p is probably going to be the way to go for this game, at least for now. And then we're going to be medium on the preset here, but we are going to wind up changing that over to low here in just a little bit. Resolution scaling, you can use dynamic or static. I will wind up using static when we get into it, but I'm on dynamic 60 now to make it aggressive to kind of see where it would wind up at. And it definitely gives you a little higher FPS, but it kind of is about 50% resolution scale. We'll take a closer look at that real quick as well. But here's 720p medium preset dynamic upscaling, 25 watts and 8 gigs of VRAM just in the very beginning jungle area, 30 FPS, 29 FPS here. And if we go to 900p, we're going to get 28 FPS or so. We're not even really getting into doing anything yet. And 1080p, of course, 24 FPS, and it'll get pretty low there. Again, medium's not really going to be the way to go here no matter what resolution we go with. And if we bring the static resolution down to 50 instead of using dynamic, we'll get the same FPS we get with dynamic set to 60, it being aggressive. And I am going to use static upscaling in the game from this point out, but I was just taking a look at the difference between the two. Going back up to 75% here at 720p medium preset, FPS is going to kind of bounce all over the place, and I wouldn't expect the game to run on this device with everything set to medium anyways, but that's just kind of where we started things off. Switching over to low though, 720p, 60% on our scale for static, 25 watts, 8 gigs of VRAM. We do get enough FPS here to kind of stay above 30, which is what we want. Anything 30 and above will be pretty decent in a game like this. It's not a fast-paced FPS shooter game or anything like that. I've put about 5 or 6 hours in over on Game Pass, and it's pretty good. Transitioning in and out of the in-game rendered cutscenes, which are really nice. They help with the immersion of the game and the way everything feels, work out pretty well. It's not too jittery or stuttery, and this is just early access. We're not even into the day one patch or anything like that, so it's actually not too bad. You will of course go under 30 FPS from time to time, but depending on where you're at in the game, and I'm sure later on in the game with bigger set pieces, NPCs and all that, we certainly will take a hit. The only thing you can turn down a little lower here is turning off reflections, but honestly I never saw any gain from FPS with this, and it does degrade the game a lot. 54 FPS right here with all the reflections turned off, which is the lower low we could go. Turning those back on doesn't hurt performance, and makes the game look a lot better, so just keep that in mind. If you did see that setting and were thinking about turning it off, I really didn't seem to gain anything there. It's really resolution scale because of being GPU bound where we gain. So if I go from 60, which was 54 FPS, we put that to 75, we're going to come down to about 49 FPS. So it'll crisp up your picture a little bit more, and this gets us closer up to almost like a quality FSR, I guess, versus like a balanced at 60 or so. Performance being what, around 50, sometimes less, but that's kind of where we'd be for our resolution scale here. And again, depending on where you're at, you could wind up in the 50s with this game, the 40s pretty easily. You're going to be inside or certain areas, but of course you're going to wind up in other areas of the game that are not going to run quite like that. These will be areas that could run in the 30s and occasionally dip under 30 FPS at these settings. Again, that's why getting into 900p, 1080p, lowering the wattage even, or trying to raise into too much with the medium settings just really hurts performance too much if you really want to stay above 30 FPS. But if you keep things pretty low, and honestly this game still looks pretty darn good on a handheld small screen especially, so far for me, my time in this going through it, it's been pretty darn playable here on the Ally X. I have some dips under 30 a little farther than I'd like from time to time, depending on where I'm at. And again, I think that could get worse later on in the game. But yeah, for the most part, pretty impressed considering the spec sheet and considering everything with this game, that it was even able to run this decently as I'm running around my first few hours of the game. So yeah, ultimately I think fairly playable. Now I've also played this over on GeForce Now, and it's running really well over there, solid 60 FPS, and it will be coming to xCloud here when full release happens on Sunday, because I am making this video a couple days ahead of time in early access. You're also going to have busier areas like the Vatican here, of course. Like I said, that might get a little stutter here and there, but it's not too bad. Stays pretty smooth. You are going to drop under 30 here from time to time as well. And a quick look at 900p in the same area with the same settings at 75%. It does start to dip a lot more than I would want it to versus the 720. You'd have to get more aggressive with the scaling, 60%, to kind of get it there. And at that point, I'd rather just leave it at 720p, 75. But you can kind of bounce around and mess with that a little bit, but ultimately, much better performance here with the 720p here set this way. And additional VRAM I did mess with, but it really wasn't necessary. I never really used more than 6.8 to 7.2 gigs throughout this, and I wouldn't expect a game like this on these lower settings to use all the way up to 8 gigabytes anyway. My 4060 Ti on my desktop playing this game has 8 gigs of VRAM and my system has 16, just like this one, but we're running this one at much lower settings and resolution, so I'm really not worried about that. An additional RAM here isn't going to make any difference, at least not at these type of settings and resolution. So anyways, guys, I think you get the point. The game so far anyway is quite playable here on the Ally X, and pretty surprising considering the necessary specs. It may not be above 30 all the time, but so far it's been pretty good. So anyways, thanks a lot for coming and check out the video. As always, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
What secrets lie?